Hey guys, Kyle here with One Big Acres. So on today's episode, it's kind of an idea that came to mind. I thought I'd talk about honey since primary reason for beekeeping for most people is to produce honey. So I thought I'd dedicate just an entire episode about honey and various attributes of honey and some of the hidden secrets of the industry, so on and so forth. I've got a lot to unpack here, so I'm going to jump right into it. What is honey? Most of us know that bees collect nectar from flowers, but we don't know exactly how they turn that nectar into honey. So what happens is the honeybee, they forage within 2 miles of their home. They fly out up to about 2 miles from their beehive in the search of nectar sources through flowers or various crops or trees, so on and so forth. And what they do is they'll suck it up using what's called proboscis. It's a fancy term for their straw-shaped tongue. They'll suck up using that, and they'll store it in their crop. Another term for it is their honey gut, basically their stomach. While it's in their stomach and they're going from flower to flower, it's being mixed with enzymes. Once they get full of this nectar, and at this point, basically, because of the nectar on board, they've practically doubled their weight because they'll consume, or not necessarily consume, they'll collect about the same amount of nectar as the weight of their body, and they'll take it back to the hive. Once they come back with it to the hive, they'll transfer it from bee to bee 2 or 3 times. Basically, one bee will drink it from the other bee, and during this process, they're continuing to mix with these various enzymes. Once they've done that 2 or 3 times, they'll put it in a cell, basically a honeycomb cell. Once it's in this cell, they're going to continue to fan the hive. Basically, what they're doing is drawing out the moisture content because nectar is very wet, and as you know, honey is fairly solid feeling. Not necessarily solid, but it's a lot thicker anyway. So what they're doing is they're fanning the wings and drawing out the moisture content of the honey, drawing out the water, basically. Once it gets to about 17% moisture content, then it's good. Anything below that, it's good. It's going to be stable and be able to be stored for a long time. And then the bees will finish that cell by capping it over with more wax. And then from there, they can store it for basically ever. I mean, there's been 2,000-year-old honey that's found in the mine tombs that's actually still edible. So it's very stable once it's reached the proper moisture content. So some of the benefits and why we collect honey, and it's not just because it tastes amazing, but it's very healthy for you. It's loaded with antioxidants, antibacterial, antifungal properties. It can heal wounds, it can boost your immunity. But the most common health benefit of honey for most people is that it helps with your allergies. The reason for that is natural, real, raw honey contains pollen mixed in it as well. This is just because of the close proximity of the way bees store the pollen, and it just naturally kind of a little bit of pollen gets mixed in with this honey. That's why I always suggest to people, like I've got fans across the nation who are wanting to buy my honey to help with their allergies. And as much as I appreciate that, I always tell them, I suggest them to go contact one of their local beekeepers, because my honey may not help fight their allergies, say in Illinois or Indiana. Because the bees, my bees don't collect from the same type of plants here as they do in Illinois and Indiana, and what you're actually typically allergic with, at least with seasonal allergies, is the pollen of your local plants. So that's why I suggest to people, if you're consuming honey as a means of helping fighting your seasonal allergies, make sure you source out your honey from as local as you can find beekeeper. You know, within your actual part of the state even does matter. So speaking of buying local, that kind of brings me to the topic of real versus fake honey. I'm sure you've all heard about, you know, buy local because it's real honey, but what exactly does that mean? So back in 2001, the government, the EPA, different various 3- and 4-letter agencies realized that there was a giant influx of Chinese honey coming into the country at very low prices. The Chinese honey was undercutting our domestic honey producers, basically, by selling twice as much honey for half the cost, basically. And what that did was the local honey producers just couldn't keep up with that, with those prices. They just couldn't keep up with those prices. They couldn't produce local honey at those prices. So in 2001, the government decided to place a high tariff on any honey coming from China, basically. This was to kind of help out the local honey producers, local beekeepers, and the local honey industry to keep on its feet and keep that business as local as we can, which was an amazing thing for beekeepers around the country. But because of that, that kind of stirred up even more issues. So what started happening was China started transshipping their honey. And basically what I mean by that is they started shipping their honey to third-party countries. Those third-party countries would relabel it as their own honey, and then it would get imported in the United States. Some people said we should just drop all import of honey altogether, but we can't. The United States produces something like 170 million pounds of honey per year, and we consume about 400 million pounds of honey per year. Those are just rough numbers. I'm just kind of going off the top of my head, but it's around about those kind of numbers. So as you can see, we definitely need to import our honey, but we have to be careful in the methods that we do it and who we get it from. So because of these high tariffs, China was shipping their honey through third-party countries, and say like Malaysia. So the country of Malaysia produces about 37,000 pounds of honey per year from their local beekeepers. We were importing 37 million pounds per year of honey. You can see the problem with that logic is that they really couldn't produce the amount of honey that they were providing for us. So what we found out was China was transshipping through Malaysia, relabeling it to skip those high taxes from China, or from the tariffs rather. So then we started finding ways to track this honey. One of the ways that they've used to track the honey is actually just pollen testing. What they'll do is they'll go in, take a sample of honey, and test to see exactly what pollen is in it. In other words, make a profile of it. Make a profile of what specific plants were foraged from to make this honey, using the pollen found in the honey. And using that profile, they can actually pinpoint exactly where geographically this honey is coming from because of the specific plants that they're seeing, the specific types of pollen that they're seeing in this honey. So again, we were kind of on the right track. Like, no, we're seeing all these issues. In fact, there's this big scandal, what they called Honeygate. I'm not going to go into the long details of it, but the federal government found out that various countries were transshipping and basically falsifying shipping documents, so on and so forth. I highly suggest that you look into this Honeygate situation. It's actually pretty fascinating. Something like 20-something people were indicted. 9 or 10 people fled the country. 9 or 10 people were actually arrested. It was a huge scandal. The best way to look into that is actually on a show on Netflix called Rotten. Their very first episode of the very first season, I believe it's called Lawyers, Guns, and Honey. Is that episode. It talks about it fully and talks about the honey industry in depth, at least the backside of it, kind of the dark secrets of the honey industry. So I highly suggest that you watch that video. So, with all these issues, not knowing exactly where your honey is coming from, even still today, even with all the testing we have, we're finding out more and more ways that they're adding to their honey. The problem is China doesn't really produce as much honey, just like Malaysia doesn't produce as much honey as they're shipping into us, at least not naturally. What they're using is various additives, corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup, and all these different types of syrups. And so we were able to test for this corn syrup. Well, then they found out that if they used rice syrup instead and added it to the honey to double the amount of honey that they have at a very low cost, they found out that if they used this rice syrup, it wasn't detectable in the way that we were testing for corn syrup. So the battle just continues, and it's been like that for the last 20, 25 years, as far as these various countries keep finding new ways to cheat us on real honey. It's even happened domestically. Some of our honey producers in the States have been known to add these different various additives to double their crop instead of actually producing it. One of the ways that various countries get around the fact of that pollen testing is they use ultrafiltration, basically very, very fine filtration systems that filters out all the pollen, so it's impossible to determine the origin of the honey. So with all these issues and not knowing the honey on the shelf, whether or not it's actual real honey or if it's just corn syrup with a little bit of honey flavoring in it, what do we do? Well, as a consumer, as somebody who's not a beekeeper and producing your own honey, what can you do to make sure that your honey is real? So the first thing is you check the label. That can work, but not always. Some of these labels, as I'll bring up on this one, will say, and hopefully it'll zoom in just fine. Give it a second. If you take a moment and read this label, it will not say much about honey on there. Ingredients. It says, I'm not sure what it's, some type of syrup, but different flavorings, so on and so forth. I'm not going to show the front label of this jar of so-called honey, but I'll say that it was just picked up in our local grocery store, and the shelves are just stocked full of these kind of products that claim to be honey and they're not. Some of the honey bottles are very generic on the back. For ingredients, see website basically, and what they're trying to do is they know that the typical consumer is kind of lazy. They're like, oh, yep, and that's as far as they go with it. They're not actually going to look into the ingredients of that product. They're hoping for it anyway. So that's one way you can check the label. Sometimes it'll just say, see website for ingredients, and then sometimes it'll flat out on the ingredient list talk about all these different additives. So the other method that we can use, you can actually test your honey. There's dozens of different types of tests, and I'm going to just show one test. But look online, you'll see tons of different tests, but I'll just at least show one test to kind of highlight this. So this is a store-bought honey. My wife went and picked this up today just for this test, basically. Otherwise, I wouldn't support buying not real honey. You'll notice that it's a beautiful color. It actually tastes really good. But if you look at this, and hopefully you guys will be able to catch this up because it's so light, you'll notice how quickly it pours. Very, very thin, right? Now, some of that could be on how old the honey is. Some of it could be on room temperature. I'll tell you right now, in our house, it's about 70 degrees, so it's not warm at all. And especially when you consider the way it's going to look from our honey. This is our honey. You'll notice quite the difference. It's just a lot thicker when it drips. So that's one way to tell, is just the drip test. There's other various methods where you can pour it in water, and not real honey, because of the sugar syrup that's in it, will just dissolve pretty quickly, versus honey, if you pour it in real honey, if you pour it in water, just room temperature water, it'll just fall to the bottom of the water, the glass of water, and just stay there. And it really shouldn't dissolve unless you agitate the water, stir it up. Another thing that you want to look at is crystallization, basically, where your honey will crystallize. What I mean by that is your honey, after a while, if it's real honey anyway, it'll turn very, very thick. Sometimes it'll change color to a lighter color, either a tan or a white, and it'll start looking like granulated sugar. That's actually a good sign. That doesn't mean that your honey's going bad. That's a really good sign. That means that it's really good quality honey. This honey is maybe about a month old, and it's starting to do that. Some raw honey will crystallize faster than others depending on the nectar source. I've noticed that the Palo Verde honey that we harvest, I think it's just because it's high in sugar content in the nectar, it does crystallize a lot faster than our fall harvest. But you'll notice that, like this honey, it'll be in our cabinet for years and stay liquefied because it's not real honey. So a lot of unscrupulous honey producers will use these ultrafiltration methods to pull out all the pollen, not only to mask the origin of the honey, but also pollen is one of the ingredients that kind of helps this honey crystallize. And also by adding all these various syrups, it'll also prevent it from crystallizing. And what they're doing is they're making for a longer shelf life. It doesn't look good to have honey that's solid and light colored looking on the shelf. It just doesn't look good. But what I say to that is that that's a sign of true honey, is if it crystallizes, and I like it. You can eat it just like that by the spoonful. It's just, a lot thicker. Or you can take, especially if it's in a glass container like this, I could take this glass container and soak it in really hot but not boiling water for a while, and that will warm it back up and that will re-liquefy it for your use. And now it'll crystallize again after that, but you can continue to do that each time it crystallizes. So that's one of the things that you can use. There's other various methods for testing on whether or not the honey that you got from the store is real or fake. Look online, make your own judge that. My thing is, the only way to guarantee it is if you buy from your local beekeeper, and you know them, and you know their harvesting methods and their practices and their integrity. So I suggest, no matter where you are in the nation, find yourself a local beekeeper and support them and buy directly from them. You're going to pay more, but that's because you're going to get real honey. So another thing that I want to touch on just kind of quickly is the term organic honey. When I see that listed as a local organic honey on like Craigslist or whatever it may be, it actually kind of makes me laugh a little bit. So there's a couple issues with that. For one, if you're a small-time honey producer and you don't produce that much honey per year, there's really no regulations on, I could put organic on my honey and I would not be outside of the regulations, right? If you're a major honey producer, there are stricter regulations on you claiming through the USDA that your honey is organic. Some of the regulations are that, so basically what organic means is that these bees that produce this honey have by no means had access to any chemicals whatsoever, long story short of it. So keep in mind that honeybees forage on average 2 miles, up to 2 miles from their hive. Sometimes longer, some people even say 4 miles from their hive. So potentially they could have a 16 square mile foraging area. That means within that 16 square mile area, there could be no use of any chemicals. And what I mean by no use of any chemicals, I mean no crop fields, because pretty much all crop farmers use some sort of chemical, pesticide, herbicide, chemically treated fertilizer, so on and so forth. There could be no possibility of it, so no crop fields in the area. No houses in the area, because some of these chemicals include household chemicals. So there can be no chance of any contamination in this honey. So there can't be any houses in the area. Can't be any roads in the area because of chemical contamination just by vehicles traveling. Oil spillage, radiator fluid spillage, emissions, and just all sorts of things. Plus along the roadside, many counties, many areas, they'll spray along the roadside to prevent weed buildup, or spray whole woodland areas for mosquitoes in some areas. So I can't really think of a place in the United States that is that desolate and that unpopulated, where there's not a single road, not a single farm, not a single person in that area. So it actually, especially locally here in Arizona, there's just no foraging area that's that isolated. So it kind of makes me laugh. So, be cautious on paying extra when they say it's organic, and paying extra just because it says it's organic. Don't believe in all the hype. Because another aspect of being required to be considered organic is even like the type of equipment used. No screened bottom boards, pretty much no pest management whatsoever. There's a few treatments, but almost no pest management is allowed when you're having organic. Plus you have to have your harvesting station inspected by the USDA, and all these various regulations that I almost guarantee it's very, very rare that anybody actually has true organic honey that's listing it. So long story short, on all this, my point that I'm driving home, and so this isn't even a point for my own sales, because I really just don't concern myself with selling that much honey. I just don't concentrate on my honey production. I concentrate more on my bee propagation than anything else. But the solution to all of this is always buy local. Always buy from a beekeeper and know the actual beekeeper, not just some local beekeeping company, not just some local honey producer, but an actual true beekeeper. That's the only way that you know that you're getting what you're asking for and getting what you're expecting and getting this high quality, wonderful tasting, beautiful honey. So I hope you've enjoyed the video and hopefully you've learned something. If you got any comments, questions, concerns, anything, please feel free to comment below. Even if it's just like, wow, I didn't know that. That'd be great for me to see some comments below. Make sure to show your support by liking, sharing, and subscribing. You can also check us out on Facebook. I'll have a link to our Facebook page in the description. And I also have a link to our new website, that's been around for like the last month or something like that. So check that out as well. I'm always adding content to both of those. Also, since you found my channel here, make sure to hit my my icon for my channel and look through my other videos. Maybe you'll see something else that catches your eye and that you might find interesting. Also, I'd like to hear from you if you got any suggestions for future videos. Thanks again for all your support. Take care, guys, and happy beekeeping.